Welcome to this lesson on structures. After reviewing this lesson, you will be able to define and declare structures, use a structure, create and use arrays of structures, and pass a structure variable to a procedure. In this lesson, we'll explore structures. Before we dig into structures, it's probably useful to explore why do we need these structure things. So let's take a look at a simple problem where I'm going to be building a Visual Basic Forms application, and I'm going to be dealing with many things, okay? And the things in question happen to be people or persons, okay? Now, a person has many attributes, so that's going to be a lot of variables for each record. So a person has a first name and a last name, person ID number, maybe a date of birth, just to get started. And when we really get rolling, we could add city, state, zip, rate of pay, all kinds of things. We could end up with dozens, even hundreds of different attributes and variables just for one person, let alone when you have a collection of dozens or hundreds or thousands or even millions of people. This could get really kind of complicated in terms of the number of variables that we're using. And so let's explore just a simple case. We'll start with some Hanna-Barbera characters, Fred Flintstone, Wilma Flintstone, Barney Rubble, and Betty Rubble, just to get started. Okay, so I've got a simple form open here. I've got a button on it to give me an event that I can capture. And I've done a little preliminary work. Let's take a look at what I've done. So I've used the region tool to divvy up what I'm showing you currently, which I'm calling old school. And then once we've had a chance to explore how we would address this without structures, we'll open up and take a look at the structure demo, and we'll hide the old school version. So in the project itself, I've created on the form some form level variables. And so person ID, first name, last name, date of birth. Person ID is an integer, names are strings, and date of birth, well, that's a date. And that's pretty clear. And then, okay, well, we're going to have multiple of each of these for each, each person has their own set. And so how am I going to store a set of things? Well, the way we've learned to do that is with arrays. Okay, so I'm going to have a list to keep track of all of the person IDs, and I'm going to have a list or an array for all of the first names. I'm going to have a list for all of the last names and a list for all the date of birth. And of course, the other thing I'm going to have to keep in order is if index number 2 is Betty Rubble, then index number 2 first name has to be Betty, and index number 2 last name would need to be Betty. And if I ever get any one of those arrays out of order, it's game over for the whole mess. All the data will be misaligned, or I won't be able to know which data is misaligned and which is not. So really a lot of complexity there when I'm using, and this technique is called parallel arrays. So I have a different array for each attribute of what should be an indisseverable record, a record I shouldn't be able to sever and break apart. It should all stay related. And so this is kind of awkward given what we know so far, what we can do so far. There's not really an easy way that we've learned to date. And of course, we're foreshadowing here. This is what we're going to see is really handy about structures. So let's just go on and see how we build this. Okay, so I've got a single variable to hold momentarily the instance of one person's ID, first name, last name, date of birth. And then I've got these lists, these arrays that can hold multiples. So what I will do is I will first populate the first person, save them into the array, and then reuse these variables to use them for the next person. So I don't have to have as many variables as there are people. So keep it a little simpler. All right, so then we go in, and now that's our form level variables, and then I have use the form load event. When the form loads, that's where I'm going to initialize some things. And so here I've painstakingly typed out my uh, assignments. So we assign person ID as 1, first name Fred, last name Flintstone, date of birth. This is the first airing of the Flintstones cartoon series, was September 30th, 1960. So I'm using that as Fred's birthday. And then as soon as we've got those variables populated, I turn around and dump them into index 0 of the arrays that we have waiting. And then we overwrite the variables, person ID, F name, L name, DOB, date of birth, with the information for Wilma and dump her stuff into the second, which is to say index 1 of those arrays. And again with Betty, and again with Barney. And you can see for each one of these initializations, I then have to go and dump them into the array. And I'm using 4 arrays, and every attribute I add to a person ID. So if I were to add a pay rate, or if I were to add a city, a state, a zip code, every one of those elements would add a whole nother array that I have to keep track of and have to keep synchronized. Goodness help me if I add most of a record to its arrays, but then I skip one element in one array. Again, everything will be misaligned after that. How will I know which item goes to which? Because right now the indexes are all aligned. So index 2 is going to give me all of Betty Rubble's information. But if I skipped one of those, then so the next thing I do is add index 2 and get some of Barney's stuff. That would be kind of a problem. All right, so let's see that. I've got the click event for the button. I put no code in here. I'm just using that to put a breakpoint and set some variable watch windows. Let's run this and see what we get. Okay, so at this point, the form has loaded, and so things are initialized, and the arrays have been populated. And if I hit the go button, it's just going to run to the breakpoint. And here I have a number of watch variables set, one that is out of scope, and we'll worry about that in the second part of our demo. But now if I expand out the first name array, you see that it's Fred, Wilma, Betty, Barney, and let's expand the last name list. And so you see that index 0, Fred, goes with index 0, Flintstone. Okay, and same thing with 1 for Wilma goes to Flintstone, and 2 for Betty goes to Rubble, and so forth. And you can see very easily if I happen to omit one of these and pushed all those down. So if it went Flintstone, and then essentially our missing record got overwritten with Rubble, then we'd end up with Fred Flintstone and Wilma Rubble, and that's not at all what we want. So a lot of complexity here. So what is a better way? Well, structures give us a better way, and let's see what we can do with that. How could we make one data type that holds all these different data types in one record, in one element, but holds them in such a way that we don't have to do a lot of code manipulation to break them apart and get the individual pieces back out? That is the whole thing that the structure does for us. So let's see how a structure is defined. I'm going to go ahead and take everything that is in our old school example and just comment it out. And get it out of the way. Okay, so I think I've got our old school method completely hidden. Yeah, okay, and commented out. Now let's see how we would do this with a structure. So we're going to expand out our structure demo, and let's uncomment the code that I had sort of sleeping there in the comments. and let's make it live. Okay, so here is how we define the structure. We open with a structure statement and give the structure a name. I'm calling this a person structure. And here's the end of structure. And look, here are the same variables that I was using, which is why I had them commented out so they wouldn't conflict with each other. So a person structure is composed of a person ID, a person first name, a person last name, and a person date of birth. And this is a blueprint. It is a template. It is not the instance of a person. I need to create a person and in order to put this data, put data into this structure record. Okay, but this is the simple definition of the structure. So when I refer to this, once I have an instance of this here, you just say in a comment. So if I had created a new person as this person, and I wanted to refer to the value of their first name, I would refer to this person dot fname, and so that might be equal to Wilma. Okay, so notice that we're extending this object notation, this dot notation, here to use with structures. And so what I've done in creating this structure, I've created a new data type. I've defined a new data type. So it's based on a composite of the old data types. So this particular structure at this point in time is an aggregate of an integer, two strings, and a date. Okay. And so now I can have one array, and I'll just call it person list, to store all of the data for the individual persons. And let's see how that works. Okay, so similar to what I had in the old school example is I am assigning the individual contents to the person list at index 0. So person list is declared as an array of persons. So let's go up and see where that is. So there's our structure being defined. And then here we've defined an instance of a new data type. This is an array of the data type person, and we're naming it person list, and it's an array. If we put 3 in there, that means 0, 1, 2, 3. It will have 4 records, which is exactly what we need for this example. Okay, and now at index 0 of this array, the 0 structure record is going to have a person ID of 1, a first name of Fred, a last name of Flintstone, and a date of birth of September 30th, 1960. And then we just go and do the same, indexing or incrementing the index each time to put it in a different instance of that array, I should say a different index of that array, because the array can hold multiple persons in our person list. And now let's see how that works. And so we run to our breakpoint, and now, having commented out all the original variable names, those are no longer in scope, but person list is. And now if I expand out person list, rather than being in 4 separate arrays, if I go, let's say, to index 2, I notice that the structure of that element of the array has a DOB field, which is a date. It has an FName field, which is a string, an LName field, which is a string, and a person ID, which is an integer. And here they are. That's Betty Rubble's birth date, as I've made it up, Betty's first name, her last name, and her person ID. And we can expand this out and see that it indeed has all of these elements. And so much easier way to keep all of our things together. There's no way at this point that I can accidentally um, misalign multiple arrays for the simple reason I'm no longer using multiple arrays. It all fits in one array. And now if we look at person list 0 dot fname, we get Fred. Nice. So a lot less clutter, a lot simpler, and it's going to allow us to do much more powerful programming with a lot less complexity. All right, let's recap where we are. So we've created this structure called person. So we have a person structure. And as you might imagine, we're going to want to unpack the constituent parts of the person structure quite often to manipulate them, update them, add new records to them, and to display them. Okay, so let's take the example of displaying it. And of course, we can always write the code each time we need to do whatever we need to do to manipulate this record. But since we're going to do it so often, it would be very handy to develop one or more procedures, either subroutines or functions, depending on what we're doing, to handle this for us. And so here I have put together a show record function that is going to accept an argument of a person type. So if you have a person structure and you pass it to the function show record, it is going to try and parse that and output it to the text boxes that I've got set up here in our form now. So I've got a text box for the person ID, for the first name, the last name, and the birthday. I've also set up a group box to kind of make it intuitive that these are being displayed, and my go button, this is the record number that you want to enter to look up the record number. Now, ultimately, it might be useful to look it up by the person ID or by the first name or last name, do kind of database kind of functions on it. We'll get there, not in this lesson. But we're just going to look it up by the record number. Remember, the record number, which is the index number of the array, is different than the person ID number, okay? So let's go back and take a look here at our code. So we've got our structure. We want to pass that structure to this function, which is going to display it for us. Let's take a look at the code that's actually going to do that. So that happens when we hit the go button. So here, when we hit the go button, initially I'm saying declare my record as integer. So that's just a counter to the number of the element in the array, in the list of the record you want to display. And because the user could have put something nonsensical into that text box, like a letter or something, if I didn't validate it, I'm going to first attempt to parse it into an integer. And let's assume it parses into an integer. Well, that's not good enough, because just because it's an integer doesn't mean it's in the range that is valid for this array. What range would be valid for the array? Well, we assume that the array starts counting at 0 and it goes all the way up to upper bounds. So let's make sure that it's in the range of 0 to upper bounds. And as long as it's in that range, then that could be a valid record that we can display. Once we've done those preliminaries to make sure, then we're going to call our function showPerson. And here I'm just dereferencing the list. Person list, my record, is the index of the array. And if everything is done properly, that should just work. So let's give it a try. Okay. So first, let's test for the garbage. If I put in GGGGG, that doesn't translate to an integer, and good, it's ignored. What if I say I want record 99? Well, I don't have 99 records. That's out of bounds for the array. Good, that's ignored. Okay, now let's put something in range, like the number 2. Record number 2, 012, is the third record. So person ID 3 is Betty Rubble, and there's her birth date. Had I put in 3, I'd have gotten Barney, and 1 is Wilma, and 0 is Fred. So that's all working. Nifty. Okay. While we're at it, let's take a look at something else. So now this is probably the most efficient way, but it can be a little bit confusing. I just said show record, and then I dereferenced the person list my record. So that array at my record is what you're talking about. And some students may be, okay, you're spinning my head with these arrays. Okay, couldn't we just have an example of sending one individual person to it? Okay, and break this down so it's a little clearer. Okay, so let's do that. So I can create a new person record, an empty person record. Dim this person as new person. Okay, so I've created an empty person record. It's just floating here. Now, I want it to be able to print that record. Right now it's empty, so I need to do something else. First of all, let's comment this out. We're no longer going to print it by calling the array. And let's uncomment this. So we're going to take the this person instance and make it equal to, we're going to copy whatever that element is out of the person list into this person. So this is, let's say this is 0. My record is 0. Person list 0 would be Fred Flintstone. What would happen is that the person structure for Fred would be copied into this person. And now we can just call that function and say, hey, show record this person. And that works just as well. Let's see that in action. Okay, so 0 and go, and there's Fred Flintstone. As a matter of fact, let's go ahead and set a breakpoint in there so we can interrogate that and see in the watch variable how that works. Okay, so I'm going to run it. I'm going to say 0, go, and all right, so let's take a look and show now this person. And if we expand that out, we'll see this person. Yeah, we really did copy the Fred Flintstone structure record into this person. And that is the same as, so what is the name of our array? It's person list. So if we were to say also look at person list and just the 0 element, well, that's the record that we referenced that got copied into this person. Okay, so hopefully that breaks it down a little bit more for you. So we could do it either way. We could either just go ahead and reference the array element, which has a person structure, or we could make a copy of it and then use the copy of it for our work. Either way, it's equivalent, but sometimes this is a little bit clearer or easier to understand. Okay, so good. We now know how to create a structure. We now know how to access the elements of the structure, and we can now pass the structure as a parameter to a procedure such as a function or a subroutine in order to manipulate it. In this case, I'm only displaying it, but once we have it here, we could go ahead and alter it. That would be an important thing to consider. Do I want to send a copy of it like I'm doing here with this person, or did I want to show send the original, and then do I want to make the changes directly to it, or do I want to bring the changes back and then update it? All part of your design philosophy and your use case. In this lesson, you learned that you can use Visual Basic structure statement to define a user-defined data type, also called a structure. After defining a structure, you can use the structure to declare a structure variable. The individual variables that make up a structure are known as member variables. Member variables contained in a structure variable can be used just like any other variables. When a structure variable is passed to a procedure, all of its members are automatically passed. And finally, you can create an array of structure variables. This concludes the lesson.